I bought 6 properties in 15 months, 4 last year, 2 this year. And both of them were unique to me in the sense that the first property I purchased was a $95,000 condo with a renter in place, and the lease expires at the end of the year. So I had to inherit a tenant in that respect. And then I also bought my property in Maine back in June. So laying the first context, right, going into this, the 4 that I had in Greensboro last year, they were all condos. One of them was a townhome style condo, which is a caveat there where there's tax implications, but all condos, and they were all cash flowing across the board. I was getting around like 16 to 18% cash on cash. So I was like, okay, these are great deals. How do I find more of these deals? Well, those things are diamonds in the rough. You're not going to find 16 to 18% deals everywhere you look, right? But I found a property that had a roughly equivalent purchase price, where the first 3 that I bought last year were all around that $95,000 price tag. And then I found another one in a different community. It was also $95K. And the reason why it was kind of listed low is the renter who's in place right now, his lease is $1,000 a month. And I can get on private market right now, if I went out and put it up, I'd get $1,300 for it. And have it filled in 2 weeks also. So if I worked with the housing authority, I'll get $1,250 for it. When you have your first couple properties, you want to make sure you have good cash flow for the first year because you don't want to put yourself in a bind. But once you've established that foundation, you can kind of push the limit a little bit. And I want to start looking 1 year out, 2 years out, 3 years out, because that's when cash flow is really going to start to take off, because rents go up and your mortgage payment's going to stay the same. So you're going to have a deviation there. So with this property, $95K, the HOA was $250, which is a little bit high. I wasn't really interested in that, but it becomes the territory. You can't negotiate your HOA payment. And that helped me from a purchase price perspective because it does pull that purchase price down. Going back into, if it's 150 HOA, that's an extra $100 a month I could have put on my mortgage payment, which is only $500. So I could have paid 20% more for this property if that HOA was 150. It's all about kind of knowing that numbers, getting that intuition, working a lot of deals, just understanding how this fits together. So when I pick that up, I get that with a 6% cash on cash return. I'm making $100 a month on it. That's it. And the reason I did that is all based on that $1,000 a month lease. And I did it knowing I can get that up to $1,250. I can get up to $1,300 next year. Well, now I'm making $400 a month on this. My cash on cash goes from 6 to 25%. Very different deal. And so that's how that deal played out.
All right. Welcome to another episode of Affordable Housing and Real Estate Investing. Guys, today we got Mr. Lucus Van Blaircum on the podcast today. Man, when I heard about Lucas, and maybe I'll call him Luke just because that's how I heard his name first, but Luke got 6 rental properties in just over a year. I mean, the speed is astounding. And I first heard about him from another podcast guest named Mike Caggiano. And I was like, dude, you got 6 properties in like a year? What? It just blew my mind. I was like, let me get this guy on a podcast. Took me about 2 months to get on his calendar. I know he's super busy, but we got him here, ladies and gentlemen. So, Luke, welcome to the podcast, man. How you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, Ken. I appreciate you having me.
Dude, I've been pumped for this conversation, man. Because when I heard 6 rentals in a year, obviously, I'm assuming you've been friends with Mike for a while, so you've been hearing about this for a while. But what sort of finally helped you make that leap?
A few things came into play. Really, I was ready to make the leap back in 2022. And, so I know you've had Mike on the podcast a number of times. And in 2022, that's really when his portfolio kind of started to take off. And the financial impact of real estate investing was really starting to be apparent in his life. So I started to save up some money. I had some good money at the end of 2022. And then I got laid off from my job at the time. And I was unemployed through all of 2023. So I work in technology. These things happen. It's not the end of the world. It was nice because I'd saved up this bucket of cash to do real estate investing. So when I took a year off, it wasn't impossible. I wasn't starving, scrimping, or whatever. I had a big savings to deal with. But when I got employed, again in 2024, I was like, okay, let me get back to this real estate thing. I just was unemployed for 55 weeks. And it would be really nice if I had a cash flowing real estate investment during those 55 weeks that was paying my personal mortgage, paying my HOA dues on my personal property, paying my grocery bill, my car payment, whatever the case might be, right? And then I said, hey, if I'm unemployed 55 weeks or 555 weeks, it's no different.
Wow. I mean, talk about taking something that a lot of people might consider like truly devastating to their life, but then you use it as sort of a launch pad to confirm, hey, you knew you were going to do something and now you did something. So give us a little bit more background, right? Sometimes when people come from a corporate background, it's very hard for them to make that leap. Were there any skills that you thought you had from your corporate background that really translated to the world of real estate investing?
Yeah. So just kind of for a brief, the thinnest of background on what I do in business. So my responsibility is mostly around like business operations and like technology enabled business operations is what I tend to work on. So I happen to be really, really good with just staying organized, working in Excel, putting together really good spreadsheets when I need them, that kind of thing. And that has been the most valuable part of real estate investing for me is just having some really kick-ass spreadsheet skills. I've taught Mike a few tricks along the way as well and helped him out. And, he and I work together on a company, Section 8 Secrets, for educating other individuals on how to do real estate investing. And we have a couple of spreadsheets. Our financial forecasting spreadsheet is in there. And some of our tracking spreadsheets, those are things that I've put together. That has been number one, just staying really well organized
Wow.
and then working out of spreadsheets is
Dude, I think with a comment like that, you made it so much more attainable for so many people listening right now. Because I think, man, I want to say like essentially most of corporate America, you really think about is kind of like run through spreadsheets. It's like, oh, let's have a meeting, but then someone pulls up a spreadsheet.
Yep.
Let's have a discussion. Someone pulls up a spreadsheet. And you took that and you applied it and you got yourself comfort in investing in real estate with your analytical skills. So that probably helped you be at ease, right? Hey, I knew the principles of how to spot a good deal and how to put a spreadsheet together. And did that give you a lot of confidence, or what sort of
Yeah,
mechanism gave you more confidence?
that's a great question. And yes, definitely. I think in business, there is, the phrase like know your numbers. So if you're going to make a big investment decision in business, whether you're going to move into this market or you're going to introduce this product, you're going to do whatever, you want to really understand what is your addressable market there? What is your rate of return going to be there? You want to know your numbers inside and out. So that when you make that decision, you have confidence as a leader so that you can then convey confidence to the individuals within your organization or to your investors of your business, right? So in real estate, it's no different. The only significant difference is that you're the decision maker, you're the investor, and you're the person doing the work. So you want to be able to provide yourself that confidence. So you want to know your numbers in that regard. So putting together a really good forecasting spreadsheet, as I call it, or something where it's just like, hey, I know if I go put in my purchase price, my down payment, all my monthly costs that are anticipated, most of your monthly costs in real estate are going to be fixed to a degree. Any floating costs like utilities are going to be paid by the tenants. So you don't have to worry about that. You can go in and say, okay, I know exactly how much money I'm going to be making on this property. I know exactly how much it's going to cost me every month, give or take some maintenance costs. So I can see I'm going to make money on this property. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the trigger on it, ride it out for a while. Like you get into it when you first get into real estate. And I think one of the questions you sent me over last night was like, hey, what's something you didn't expect when you got into it? That first like 30, 60, 90 days of getting into a property, you're going to find things that are wrong with it. Your tenant's going to move in, the hot water heater's not going to work as well as it should or something like that. That kind of like rough period, like startup period of a property. But once you get through that, then it's fine. But if you go into it saying, I know these numbers work, I'm just going to put my head down and just push through these first 30, 60 days, then it's so easy.
Yeah, and I love how you brought up like Section 8 secrets, and obviously knowing some of those expenses in advance from someone like Mike, who you're friends with and you're working closely with. I'm sure that gave you a lot more confidence in your assumptions versus other people that are just wildly guessing. They might just like put some random percentages and like they're like, I hope this is it, but they never even look at the properties, nor do they even know what to look for when they look at properties. So
Yeah, in a manner, knowing Mike has certainly been helpful.
Mhm.
Like one of your best friends has a dozen different properties. He's been a real estate investor for 15, 17 years. Like, yeah, that gives me a leg up, no doubt. But we also live in the information age. We live in the age of ChatGPT. You can go into ChatGPT and just say, hey, I want to understand what costs are associated with a real estate investment. I'm going to go buy a condo or a single family home. Can you break these costs down for me? What should I expect going into this? It's going to break it all down. And then you can just use ChatGPT or Gemini or Copilot or whatever, and go in and make it your own educator. Just ask it its questions. I'm not saying you have to do that. Like if you want to go to Section 8 Secrets, it's $9 a month. Go download a 100-page PDF. Go through the course. It'll teach you everything you need to know. It'll bring it up as well. Cross-reference that with your ChatGPT educator if you want to. It's very accessible for people if they're willing to put in just a little bit of effort, and it's really not that much effort. Just go ask questions.
Ooh, that is so good, man. You just took away so many excuses that people might have had about not getting into investing, man. So let me pivot a little bit. I know you are investing in primarily townhomes and condos, right? And how did you choose that asset class specifically?
Well, so I own Like my personal property is a townhouse, and I know the expenses associated with maintaining my property are much, much, much lower than the expenses associated with maintaining, say, my parents' house, right? There's no roofing costs. There's no foundation costs. I don't have to worry about yard maintenance. Most of the exterior is going to be handled by my HOA. So in that respect, I kind of prefer that. I also like having like a lot of individuals around, a community around. I know there's not going to be a whole lot of, I'll say riffraff. There's not going to be somebody coming into my unit and just like trashing it up, partying all the time, because I'm going to hear about it from the HOA, right? So I kind of have these eyes on my property, whether I'm there or not, which is very nice. So just general cost to maintain. Yeah, you have to pay an HOA due, and that might be $150, $200, $250 a month, but you do have to look at it and break it down, just like some excessive platinum card fee. Put a spreadsheet together, break down what is the value you're getting out of your HOA, and is that actually worthwhile to you? And when I looked at it, it's absolutely worthwhile.
Dude, I love that. And that goes against so much of what I've heard in the past where it's like, hey, everybody wants a single family home. This is the best. But you quickly realize, like, I had to replace a roof on one of my single family homes. It cost like almost 10 grand. I had an HVAC stolen at one of my units. That cost another 5 grand. Dude, it's just these things just add up over time, and people never set aside the money for these. They might call it unanticipated expenses, but I like to argue that they were pretty anticipated at some point. Like, it's going to break down at some point.
Yeah, maybe an
So
HVAC theft, not so anticipated, but definitely a breakdown, right? Your HVAC is going to go every 10, 15, hopefully 20 years, where you're going to have a pretty significant replacement cost there. Your condo will definitely have an HVAC associated with it, most likely, depending on what kind of condo you get into. But the roof is definitely one of those things where, if you're paying 10K on a roof, then that's a pretty small single family home. If you have something that's a even decent size, you're looking at upwards like 15, 20, 25,000 nowadays. And then there's no like foundation costs are just going to be astronomical, no matter how you look at it. So if it goes wrong with your foundation, a tree root goes through it, or it cracks or whatever, I don't have to deal with any of those. And my insurance costs is going to be a lot lower. My condo insurance on most of my condos is like $400. You're not insuring a single family house for $400 a year.
no, not even close, man. And so now that we talked about the benefits, right? Let's talk about the markets that you're in. So you're in Maine, you're in Greensboro. How has been your experience been working with the housing authority, the local housing authorities? Because sometimes people's experience working or investing in affordable housing is highly dependent on the housing authority that they work with. For example, where I have one of my properties in Alabama, there's a certain housing authority that takes almost like 3 months to get an inspection out. And then there's another one that's within 2 to 4 weeks. Big difference.
Yeah.
Same county. So what has been your experience working with your local housing authorities?
We'll say with Greensboro Housing Authority, it's kind of been a bit of an uphill battle. There's been some struggles there. I do know that they are also open to improving that. I have had conversations with them specifically, with higher ups at Greensboro Housing, with like people who are running special projects there to try and improve their efficiency. But their turnaround time leaves a bit to be desired. I think with them, it'll be about 2 weeks before I hear back. So just to kind of go through the Section 8 process a little bit for like introducing a new unit, just so folks are fully up to speed here. You buy a property, you find a tenant. That tenant's going to have a voucher. You then, complete a lease. You don't sign it with the tenant yet, but you send in the voucher. You send in what's known as a request for tenancy approval, which is just a confirmation that you send all that stuff into the housing authority. Here's all my paperwork. They review it. They're going to send an inspector out to your unit, inspect it. Once that passes, you sign your lease. You sign a HAP contract, a housing authority payment, I think it is, contract with the housing authority. You get that stuff signed and you're done. You're collecting rent. You're good to go. You just maintain the property, maintain a relationship with your tenant. So there's kind of like that 3-step initial upfront: buy property, get tenant, get the inspection, pass the inspection. With Greensboro, what I've found is that if I send them in an RFTA, request for tenancy approval, it'll take about 2 weeks to get the inspection scheduled. That's not 2 weeks to get the inspection. That's 2 weeks just to get it on the books. And then from there, it's usually about like 10 or 14 days later when I'm actually going to have the inspection. And then once I pass the inspection, assuming I do, and I have not before, but most of the time I will, that's when I can start collecting rent. I can get the lease signed, tenant can move in, we're good to go. So that's a good like 4-week dead time there where I'm not collecting rent. There's no money coming in there. And I have to be aware of that from the time that I have a tenant. If you go with a private market, when you find a tenant, you get that lease signed and they have the money for the security deposit, boom, you're good to go. You're collecting rent right then. So I'm going to have I'm going to have 4 additional week of vacancy working with a housing authority that I'm not going to have working with private market. So I just need to be aware of that going in. Now, I like working with Section 8 because, as we've discussed, you're going to get a lot of money from your government, depending on the tenant, how much money they make. So you're going to have a certain secured amount of income every month. The government's never going to miss their rent payment, right? And Section 8 tenants, housing choice voucher tenants, tend to last a little bit longer. I think the average tenure is double. Average tenure on a private market, as I recall, something like around 3 years, 3 or 4 years. For a housing choice voucher tenant, it's like 8 years. So in that regard, you're going to have, you benefit in the long run from that vacancy, but you do have to pay it up front, right? And so what I've worked with Greensboro is hey, let's see what we can do about getting a faster turnaround time on getting the inspection scheduled. Like, yeah, if it takes a couple weeks to get that on the books because you guys are busy, I get that, but it shouldn't take me, 10 or 14 days to hear back to just get it scheduled. And if we can cut that down to 2 weeks, I think it's going to radically reduce the, the barrier of entry for new units and new landlords coming into Greensboro Housing Authority specifically. On the flip side, the property that I bought in Maine was the most seamless process I've ever had. I can even possibly imagine. I had a tenant, and we could talk about tenant differences here in a little bit, but I had a tenant. She wanted to look at the unit. She looked at the unit. She got her voucher. I sent the voucher in. The next day, I hear back from the housing authority that they're going to have the inspection scheduled. That was Thursday. Had the inspection scheduled the following Monday, and we're done.
That's insane.
It was a rapid turnaround time, and I think we added there was an additional day of, I'll say, negotiation in there, just because what I was going to ask for rent was higher than what that housing authority had for their budget. And I was like, hey, let me just understand, make sure that this is as high as you guys can go before I really enjoyed the tenant. I enjoyed talking to them. They sound like a good person. I was like, okay, good. I'm willing to take that hit to get a good tenant, a problem-free tenant, a hassle-free tenant into the unit. I'll take that $50 instead or whatever.
Wow. What a difference in terms of timing. Talking to them on Thursday and then getting scheduled on Monday. That's almost unheard of. That's what? I'm just a little mind blown right now. But all right. So obviously there's ups and downs and that's naturally the case, right? Any business, any corporation, any organization, there's always going to be differences across, especially when you go across state lines. But now that you dealt with probably you have 6 properties, were there any myths about Section 8 investing that you had in the back of your mind? And have you been able to debunk some of those myths? What would you say about that?
So I didn't have any myths myself, I don't think. Some of the common tropes that you'll hear is that Section 8 units are just generally bad units in the sense that the properties are run down, they're trashed, they're not maintained. And that's just flat out not true. Like I said, a few minutes ago, I have failed what's known as housing quality standards inspection. So when the housing authority sends out the inspector, they're looking at some of the fundamentals. They're not going to go in and, do a deep dive on everything, but they're going to make sure that your property's good. The walls have to have paint on them. The ceiling has to be painted. Some of the fundamentals. You don't want to have cracked plates. I ended up failing, for example, because the battery had died in one of my smoke detectors. And it's just something that overlooked when I was going through the unit myself, and we had to get that taken care of. So they do send out an inspector. They do make sure that the property's up to date and they make sure that it's decent. I also have inherited 2 tenants from people who have not done that. So the kind of properties that you do read about where there's mold or the ceiling's fallen in or something like that, where it's just a genuinely terrible living situation, I've inherited 2 tenants like that, where they got essentially kicked out of that unit because the housing authority, did not pass the inspection and kind of quasi-condemned it and said, this person can't live here. The housing authority does what they can to maintain a certain quality, which is very good. So that's very nice. And then the other thing is that I have heard that individuals are concerned that Section 8 tenants are going to be harder on properties, so they're not going to take care of them as much or something like that. And I suppose it kind of depends on how you look at it. From a property perspective, there's no major difference there. They're not going to be harder on the property. They're not going to cause more damage on the property than any other tenant's going to. In fact, they're going to try to do better to maintain that property because they know every year, every 2 years, it's going to be reinspected by the housing authority. And if it fails, they then have to move out. So they're going to try to keep you up to date. Hey, this went wrong or that's going on. So you have a better communication line in that respect. If you look at it, I think where that assumption kind of comes from is from a home perspective, right? Like you look in my background, for example, you look in your background, we have really good furniture in our homes because we can afford really good furniture because we have been blessed or privileged with high quality jobs, high paying jobs over whatever time period. So we can get some good furniture. These individuals, they're going through something, they've been going through something, they're generally, lower class individuals. That's why they're on a rent subsidy program. So their furniture is not going to be that great. So if you go and visit somebody, like, you just have to be aware of that. You're not going to walk into, some Ritz-Carlton. They're not going to have phenomenal. Some of them do, by whatever means, but for the most part, they don't, right? And I think that's where that assumption comes from, where they infer from the context of what they have in their home that they are not taking care of their home. And that's just not the case, right?
No, that is such. I really loved all your comments. I mean, they're all valid, and I'm really glad you helped me debunk some of the myths. Because sometimes people do just make a very generalized conception of Section 8 voucher holders. They might read something on the news and they say, "Oh, Section 8 property. This is all guns, drugs, drama," but it's not. Sometimes it's just a hardworking person, just like my parents were, that were just trying to put food on the table. That was it. So I want to talk about how you analyze your deals. And in particular, right, I've been trying to keep up with what's happening on the federal government and what the appropriations committee have been doing. And for the most part, they're trying to keep Section 8 funding relatively flat. So I'm always interested to hear you because you're so analytical. What was sort of your criteria for determining, like, hey, what's a deal when it comes to Section 8? Like, were you looking at a certain percentage of return in year 1, in year 5? Tell the audience a little bit about how you thought about your deals. And obviously, again, this full disclosure, this is not investment advice. We're not soliciting any investments on this podcast. We're just talking about how do we get the comfort around what is a deal.
That's a good question. And I'll get into some specifics here in a minute, but you mentioned the federal government and how they've tried to maintain Section 8 funding at a certain level. They haven't increased it, but then there was also talk where it might just go away all of a sudden. And my father's really plugged into the news, and he raised that concern to me. And it was like, look, I buy properties that are good quality investment properties that I can put a starter family into, right? That kind of target that early part of the market or the lower part of the market, lower in the sense like that 40th percentile range, that kind of like middle third, like lower middle quarter. So if Section 8 funding went away overnight, which it's not going to, like, that's just fear mongering, but assume it did, there's still going to be plenty of individuals out there in the private market who would be interested in renting my properties. I just happen to rent to Section 8 individuals because of the benefits that I get from it, from, again, secure funding and so on. So in that respect, when I'm looking at just a deal, I don't necessarily go into it with I'm looking at a Section 8 investment. I look at it as I'm making a real estate investment. I'm going to be placing a housing choice voucher holder into this just because that's who I like to work with. So the concerns around funding from the government and so on are kind of irrelevant to me. So I look at it, I'm going to look at when I want to analyze a deal. The first thing that I look at is just generally purchase price, right? I don't want to go out and buy something that's 400K. I don't know where on earth, like Singapore, where 400K is going to be your 40th percentile, right? You have to kind of understand like what your region is. And this is something too, where I think the barrier of entry for getting into real estate investing becomes quite high because people have no conception of what they should even be looking at. There's a lot of properties out there. There could be more, and there certainly is, depending on what podcast you listen to, there's housing shortages and so on. But there's a number that are listed more than an individual is going to be able to look at and just consume quickly, hundreds and hundreds of properties that are listed in a given area. So you need to understand what you should be targeting. So I'm going to go to, the US HUD posts their FMRs every single year. And that gives me a rough idea of the band that I should be looking at in a given area. Right. So when I look at Greensboro housing, for example, when I started investing last year, the 2-bedroom FMR was like 1139, 1140. Okay. So I should be looking around that price tag. And then the 1% rule, I think it's over favored by some individuals and it gets excused by other individuals, but it is a decent heuristic. So for something that's quick and dirty, if I can go out and rent something for 1150, just to round these numbers out, then I can go out and buy something for 115,000, give or take. That's what kind of the band I should be looking at. So I want to look at properties in that sort of like 85 to 135 band. And I'm going to go a little lower. I'm going to go a little higher because if the property has a lower HOA, then I have a little bit more money that I could put toward my mortgage payment. If it's a little bit cheaper, then there's some other things that I could maneuver there. So that's kind of why. And I don't go all the way to the bottom. And there's certainly folks out there, if you want to get into that, you're welcome to. And this might be my own assumption that somebody else you might bring on your podcast later on is able to dispel. But if you're looking at properties that are, 50, 60K in an area where 100K is that sort of like 40th percentile, there's a reason that property is 50, 60K. And I would just as soon not get into it. So I want to find a property that's going to be roughly turnkey as well. I'm not trying to renovate anything. I was a carpenter like a general contractor hand when I was in college. I've had my fair share of that. I'm good. Like I'm handy. I can do my own stuff, but I don't want to do that professionally, right? So I'll let the housing flippers go and do something. I bought a house from a flipper who went in, they renovated the kitchen, they renovated the bathroom, and they sold it to me for $40,000 more than they paid for it. I don't care. It's a good property for me. They got a good deal. They went and did what they want to do. I'm getting what I want out of it. Everybody's winning, right? So getting back on track and a little bit more specific. So we're looking at that 115K price range. Now I can go out, I can look at Realtor, I can look at Zillow, I can look at wherever, and I can start to look at the kind of properties that are in that price band. And I can start to pay attention to what those things are going to kind of run for me, what they're going to cost. And I'm going to start looking at, oh, wow, if I have an HOA, a $250 HOA versus a $150 HOA, that has a pretty significant swing on what that affordability looks like for me, because that's $100 that I can put toward a payment that I don't normally have. And where I mentioned the barrier of entry is now you have a band of properties. So now you might only have, let's say, 20 properties in the area that you can start to look at, but you can run every single one of those properties through whatever spreadsheet you've put together, or whatever ChatGPT algorithm you want to talk to, whatever the case might be there, to say, is this a good property for me? And you, as a nascent investor who's getting into real estate investing, can then start to see how these different variables play out. How does having a higher or lower HOA impact my cash flow? How does having a higher or lower valuation impact my cash flow? And just go and run the numbers on 20, 30 deals that you might not ever buy, but you get that intuition on what those numbers look like, which is much better.
Dude, I love that. I mean, just to run numbers on 20, 30 properties. I mean, for people that are fearful about getting into investing, right? I like to argue that sometimes the fear comes from just a lack of knowledge, from the unknown. And once you run an analysis 20, 30 times, you just get practice. And all of a sudden you realize you start putting things together really quickly about what might a deal look like, quote unquote. And that's why I underwrite deals every single day for people, just so that they can like copy my homework, follow along. Because if you don't do that, how would you ever know what's a deal, right? So I love that you kind of look that over, Luke, because now people can follow what you're doing and just take those steps, right? Looking at 1% rule as a rough rule of thumb, getting a band together. Okay, that's great. How about cash and cash return? Like, is there a criteria that you care most about first? Because obviously you like to buy properties that are turnkey. What's sort of your prioritization? Like, is it, hey, 10% cash and cash return, turnkey property in this neighborhood? Tell us a little bit more about your prioritization process.
Yep. So I'm going to look for turnkey properties, or at least low cost to turn properties, in the sense like I bought properties without a refrigerator. Okay, good. That's an extra $1,000 I got to add to my purchase price, whatever the case is. So I want to find turnkey properties. That's my number one. The second piece of it is I'm going to look at that cash on cash return, because I'm doing this for cash flow. I'm not buying properties on speculation. I'm not trying to like time markets. I don't want to buy something that's going to then, go up over the next couple of years. If it goes up, fantastic, but I don't intend to sell any of these. I'm here for cash flow. I'm a cash flow investor. And then the other piece from a cash flow perspective I'm looking at is I'm going to try to find something that's in the 10% ballpark of cash flow. I've bought ones as low as 7.5%, bought ones as high as 20%. But I will admit, if you find a property that's got a 20% cash flow, like, where's the headache coming from? And I've had headaches with these properties, and hey, I'm getting paid for it, but I am earning that money, right? So in that 10% range, I find that these properties don't have a whole lot of headaches involved with them. So that's decent value. And I'm also thinking about it from a comparative perspective. When you look at just, hey, if you were to go and do a 401k or some investment account, you're going to get 7-8% return on the year. So I want to get just a little bit better than that, because this isn't quite a hands-off investment strategy. So target that 10% range. And then if I see a property that I really like, I'll go a little lower. If I see a property that's like, okay, it's good, but it's not great for me, I'm going to expect that number to be a little bit higher. And then the last thing is, once I have those numbers ironed out, is what does the neighborhood look like? And I'm going to go look at just crime rate and figure out, okay, am I buying something that's like in a red crime rate area? Am I buying something that's kind of more in like the yellow, light green crime area? And that's going to be great. And I find that to be also quite important there, because you don't want to buy something where you're going to have to deal with bullet holes. That's more headache than I really want to take on. Right.
And where do you look up crime rate? What website do you use? What sources can you tell people about?
Yeah. So I think it's just called just like crimerate.org, and it just provides you a little color map, and you can kind of take a look and see what's going on. So when you're buying property in the 40th percentile, you're not going to be buying something in like that dark green A+ neighborhood. I would love to, if the property comes up like that, I will buy it, but I'm a realist, right? You're not going to get that. If you want to go out and acquire executive rentals, if that's your model, by all means, that's not my model. My model is Section 8, 40th percentile cash flow real estate. So I'm going to be looking at things where more than likely they're going to kind of be in that like yellow, like deep yellow, kind of like light orange type area. And again, this is just a color grade where it goes from, green to red. So I think we're all generally familiar with what that would look like. So with a yellow orange, you're kind of looking at like a C+, B- kind of crime grade. And again, crime grade that'll work. And use ChatGPT, use your tool, figure it out. Hey, I want to understand what crime looks like in a neighborhood. What tools would you recommend? These LLMs are phenomenal at bringing up resources for you. I don't have any off the top of my head. I found one that works for me and I rolled with it. And I will then look at the specific neighborhood that I'm buying in and then also adjacent areas, right? Buying a yellow neighborhood inside of a dark orange or red ring is going to be a problem because eventually it kind of just smooths out, right? It's just going to diffuse and you're going to have headaches. Buying something that is perhaps a little bit like light orange that's surrounded by yellow or light green. Okay, now this is interesting because it's a hot spot. Maybe, there was a series of break-ins last year and that's kind of pushed that crime up a little bit, but it's not a big deal. That's what I kind of look for is the community you're buying in and that surrounding area is going to be very important.
Dude, these are such great gems, man. And let's keep talking about your criteria because obviously you invest in HOAs, condos, townhomes. When you look at these CCNRs, right, for the HOA documents, like, are you looking for anything specifically in there as like red flags? How do you approach that process? Are you looking for anything there or you don't really care? What are your thoughts?
I'll be honest, I don't really care too much. When it comes to an HOA, what I do pay attention to as I'm going through my due diligence period, right? Doing this in advance of making an offer is either impossible or pointless. Where I want to reach out to the HOA, I want to be able to talk to their property management company because every HOA is going to have one. And say, hey, just to get an understanding of what their response time looks like. Because if you say, hey, I'm buying a property in this neighborhood, I need these documents, or if your realtor reaches out, it takes them 2 weeks to get that documentation back. Well, that's a really slow turnaround time to get this information that is necessary to be able to buy a property inside of this community. I want to see rapid turnaround. I want to have really good, clear lines of communication with the HOA that I'm buying into. And at the end of the day, that's really all I kind of care about is that they are responsive to their owners, or in this case, a prospective owner. And if I have that, then I know I can work with them.
That's so good. I love that, man. So help me bring this all together. Do you have a deal that you could like share the numbers of with like purchase price, rehab, like something to help us make it all real and come together?
Yeah, I will say, kind of going back to that sort of know your numbers, right? So I have a spreadsheet and I have each property I've purchased on every single tab. So I can kind of go through and take a look at it. And I think what's interesting to look at would be the 2 properties that I purchased this year. So we went back, we talked about I bought 6 properties in 15 months, 14, 15 months, 4 last year, 2 this year. And both of them were unique to me in the sense that the first property I purchased was a $95,000 condo with a renter in place, and the lease expires at the end of the year. So I had to inherit a tenant in that respect. So it'll be important to talk about that and how that fits in. And then I also bought my property in Maine back in June. And so I have that one I can talk about. So
Dude, let's go through the first one, man. The inherited one, tenant one.
So laying the first context, right, going into this, the 4 that I had in Greensboro last year, they were all condos. One of them was a townhome style condo, which is a caveat there where there's tax implications that we could talk about later. But all condos, and they were all cash flowing across the board. I was getting around like 16 to 18% cash on cash. So I was like, okay, I want to be able to target deals like these. These are great deals. How do I find more of these deals? Well, those things are diamonds in the rough. You're not going to find 16 to 18% deals everywhere you look, right? But I found a property that had a roughly equivalent purchase price where, the first 3 that I bought last year were all around that 95,000 price tag. And then I found another one with a different community. It was also 95K. I think 93 is what I got it for. And the reason why it was kind of listed low is the renter who's in place right now, his lease is $1,000 a month. And I can get on private market right now, if I went out and put it up, I'd get 1,300 for it.
Wow.
And I'd have it filled in 2 weeks if possible. So if I worked with the housing authority, I'll get $1,250 for it. So I looked at it, and that's what I was benchmarking this deal on: is what will I get for it next year? And that's very important when you really start to get into this. When you have your first couple properties, you want to make sure you have good cash flow for the first year because you don't want to put yourself in a bind. But once you've established that foundation, you can kind of push the limit a little bit. And I want to start looking 1 year out, 2 years out, 3 years out, because that's when cash flow is really going to start to take off because rents go up and your mortgage payment's going to stay the same. So you're going to have a deviation there. So with this property, $95K, the HOA was $250, which is a little bit high. I wasn't really interested in that, but it comes to the territory. You can't negotiate your HOA payment. And that helped me from a purchase price perspective because it does pull that purchase price down. Going back into, if it's 150 HOA, that's an extra $100 a month I could have put on my mortgage payment, which is only $500. So I could have paid 20% more for this property if that HOA was 150. It's all about kind of knowing that numbers, getting that intuition, working a lot of deals, just understanding how this fits together. So when I pick that up, like I'm looking at my information here right now, I get that with a 6% cash on cash return. I'm making $100 a month on it. That's it. And the reason I did that is all based on that $1,000 a month lease. And I did it knowing I can get that up to $1,250. I can get up to $1,300 next year. I'm not saying I'm going to pop this gentleman's rent in December. Just boop, okay, it's up 30%. Figure it out. Like I'll work with him. We can either stagger this up over time. And again, this is another thing that I really didn't know. I didn't have a good understanding of getting into real estate investing. Is there's no hard and fast rules. Like you have to adhere to your lease, and there's certain specifics, but there's a lot of gray area in how you want to work with tenants who are paying late, how you want to handle tenants who you're going to be increasing rent over time. Like you can be as soft as you want to be, you can be as hard as you want to be, and there's give and take on both sides of that. And pros and cons. So you can be, for one for better term, you be a hard ass. Hey, you're late on your rent. That's fine. I'm filing an eviction. Get out and put somebody else in here. Well, you're going to have to deal with an eviction. You're going to have to deal with turnover. You're going to have to deal with all that stuff. Versus give somebody a couple extra 2-3 weeks, they get back on track. They had something going on, like their life sorts out. So, and if you're really soft, somebody might go in, they might not pay rent for a month, and then all of a sudden they vanish off the face of the earth. So there's pros and cons on both sides. But all of that said, if I look at this deal, I bought it for $93, $250 HOA at $1,000 a month. I'm making $100. If I get it up to $1,300 over the next couple of years, or even next year, well, now I'm making $400 a month on this. My cash on cash goes from 6 to 25%. Very different deal, right? I would have bought that immediately. You would not be able to slow me down on purchasing something with 27% cash on cash return. So I don't buy properties on spec, but I will pay attention to what next year is going to look like, right? And that's something that is very transparent to forecast. I'm not looking at property valuation. I'm looking at known rents today, what I could rent that unit out for right now, but because I'm inheriting a tenant, I can't do that. And so that's how that deal played out.
Man, I love how you built that comfort level for as is right now this year. It's like, hey, this might be the worst case scenario. Tenant's already in there, but I'm assuming it was relatively turnkey because you weren't going to have to renovate the property with a tenant in place. I'm assuming.
Yeah,
right?
There were a couple like minor maintenance issues where I think like the handle had been broken off the oven before this tenant had moved in, and like one of the light fixtures was broken. I bought it knowing I had to fix that. I had it fixed up the first week. I just kind of baked that into my mental like upfront cash on the forecasting. And so I was like, okay, here's a few $100s to buy new parts, pay somebody to go put those in. That's it.
Got it. Super, super easy. But I just love how you had that long-term view upon it. It's just sometimes for people in year one, if they don't get the return, they're out of it. But you had that long-term view. And that's just really impressive for you to have that sort of mindset. So second property,
Yep.
This was the one in Maine, was it?
This is the one in Maine. Yeah. And it's a little bit different. So I will say they're both 2-bedroom condos, but we just talked about a deal with a $93,000 purchase price. This one is a $225,000 purchase price. It's a little bit different, but the FMRs up in Maine, also very different, where the rent that I listed this thing for was, I did 1%, $2,250. I probably could have listed it for say $2,300 even for private market. The housing authority that I'm working with, the most they were able to get up to is $2,180, right? So there's that $70 difference that I was talking about. And then it's like, look, it's not like I'm hurting for the cash. And this is, again, soft, being easy on your tenants and situations, being hard on your tenants. So if you want to be easy on your tenants, and which I don't mind, it's going to cost me $900 a year in that lost revenue. But I'm putting in a tenant that I have confidence is going to be a good tenant, talk to them and so on. So I take that hit. But when I bought it, I was forecasting it with $2,250, and that's utilities included. So $225, $200 HOA, and the utility costs work out to like right around $100 a month. And so when I put that one in, again, this is one of those low cash on cash properties. I'm looking right now, I see $460 a month, which is like right around 8.5% cash on cash.
Well, you had a great experience working with the housing authority.
I had a phenomenal experience working in the housing authority. And the other thing that I didn't mention, and this is something you can look out for in your given area, whoever's doing the investing, is Maine housing authorities offer a $350 incentive for any new unit added to the program. So they're going to send me $350 just for, hey, thank you so much for putting this in. Good to go. That was last year $750. Maine's had some budget issues with their HUD, so they've had to adjust some things, but still $350 is more money than I'm getting out of the Greensboro housing, which is zero, right? So I have that going for me. And the other thing too is I'm buying this property. When I purchased it for $225K, that was off market. Somebody had reached out to Mike Caggiano, who owns 6 in the same community, and he's like, "Hey, I know you've bought a lot of these. I want to sell mine." So I kind of worked by I got it through him. Got that offer through him, 225. It appraised at 240. So I'm also buying into a little bit of equity.
Wow.
Equity is, again, for a cash flow investor, meaningless, but it kind of makes things feel nice, right? So having that in the back of my mind also helped me move on that deal quite a bit. And kind of going into talking about cash on cash return with 6% with 8.5%. That's also just my first year return. Where we talk about if rents go up, that number can kind of continues to grow. Where, hey, if next year I'm able to push rents up, say 4%, well, 4% on 2,200 is about what, $90. Okay, well, that $90 is going to be pure. You push rents up next year, say 4% on 2,200, just to run the figures out. That's right around $85-$90. That $85 or $90 goes into the cash flow bucket. So my monthly cash flow goes from $460 up to around $530, $540. And okay, well, now I'm looking at, instead of having an 8% cash on cash return, now I'm pushing the numbers up to closer to 10%. And that's what I like to see. And every year that rent is going to kind of go up just a little bit. To your point, where you sent me last night, hey, 2026 FMRs are looking like they're going to be held flat. Okay, so I missed out on 1 year of this 4% gain. Does it suck? Yeah, it sucks, but it's 1 out of 30 years, right? So it's okay.
Yeah.
Like when you're working out, if you miss one workout, but you work out consistently, it's not that bad, right? So that's, again, buying on spec. No, I'm not speccing on property valuation. I'm speccing on cash flow and how that's going to look, just understanding how rents are going to go up. So that 8.5% is going to become 10% next year. It'll be 12% the year after that. Just okay, keep going off one.
Man, all right. So I want to kind of pick back up because you mentioned there were some tax differences versus townhomes versus condos earlier. I think you mentioned. What did you mean by that?
Yeah. And I will say the tax implications of real estate investing are nuanced, for want of a better term. You're welcome to, as an investor, you can get as deep into it as you want to. You're also able to go out and find a really good tax accountant and just trust them or rely on them. And they're gonna teach you the ways and teach you the ropes and make sure you do everything right. So before I answer your question, a good example of this is, and despite the fact, for example, that Mike was a real estate investor for 17 years, I got to teach him, hey, there's some costs in your closing costs, for example, when you purchase the property that you can write off that year. And then there's some costs that you have to bake into your cost basis, into the value of the property that you would then work with when you sell it. And he thought all closing costs, I think he roughly assumed all closing costs kind of get baked into that cost basis. Right. So from a depreciation perspective, your 90K property with 5,000 in closing costs is going to actually have a 95K value. And that's what you depreciate, which is not the case. There's of a $4,000 or $5,000 closing cost, like maybe 25% of it can be written off that year against your taxes. And the rest of it kind of gets baked into your cost base. So there's that one. That's a really nuanced take on things for folks. But to get to your question specifically, when I talk about, say, you have a townhouse, and you can have a townhome style condo. So if we all think about what a townhouse is, it's usually a 2 or 3 story property, like the walls go straight up. You own this slice of that building. In a townhouse like mine, I own the land that's under it, and I kind of own my backyard. I can't do anything with it because of HOA regulations, but I own the land. Hey, you know what? If you want to own some land, that's a really good feeling. That's awesome, but it's not like I can demolish the middle 25% of the building and everything else here. So owning the land doesn't do me a whole lot of good. And it's a big component of property valuation. So if you're buying on spec and land values in your area, you expect to skyrocket. Well, there's land underneath the building that you're looking at. So why don't you purchase that? And that land value is going to go up with you. And just to kind of give some rough outline. So my property is around 1,750 square feet. It's off of a really nice golf course in the area. The land, even though it's like this tiny little square backyard, is 25% of my property value. And I noticed that when I look at my property taxes, because they'll usually tell you. Where that comes into play then is if you're looking at a townhome style condo, you don't own the land under it. that land is owned by the community or by whomever, and you just own the building that sits on top of it, much like you own in a condo where you own some section of the building. So a townhome style condo versus a townhouse, that's kind of what that difference is that it's the land underneath of it that you would own. Land, you cannot depreciate. And that's where the tax implication comes from. So if I'm renting out a townhome style condo, just round these numbers out, let's say it's 200K. Well, I get to depreciate that 200K out. And then every month, for every year or whatever, when I'm doing my taxes, I get to write off roughly 3% of that, 3.5% when you look at the depreciation too. And that 3.5% property value that comes off of my top line, I don't have to pay taxes on that. That works out really well for me. We're looking at, say, $1,500 in savings, pure savings. If it is a townhouse, well, now 25% of that is land. So now the depreciating value is 150K. So instead of getting a $1,500 tax savings, I might be looking at an $1,100 tax savings. Insignificant for a unit, but if I want to go out and buy 10 or 12 or 20 of these, that becomes a pretty substantial difference.
A huge difference, man. I'm so glad. Honestly, dude, for not being like a tax attorney, you explained that so well, man. Like, dude, that was on point. Dude, I love that one. So let me ask you now, because you've worked with tenants in both markets now. Would you screen your tenants a little differently now going forward? Like, what are your thoughts on your tenant screening process, and how have you made adjustments over the last year based on what you know now?
I would absolutely screen my tenants differently. And kind of, so there's a few schools of thought here, but I think I'll paint my picture, and I'll kind of paint the picture, for example, that Mike works with and how I appreciate his model as well, but they are a little bit different. So when I'm screening tenants, I actually want to find a tenant whose rent portion is higher than is paying. I'd like the government portion to more or less cover my costs out of pocket. So if I have a property that I'm renting for $1,200 and it costs me, say, $700 a month, I'd like the government to pay $700 a month. That would be really convenient portion for me. I'd like to see the tenant have that extra $500 because rent is based on income. So that tells me that that tenant is out there. They have a job. They are working. Not to say that there's any specific value in working, but it does mean that these are, I'll say, well-adjusted individuals. Okay. As opposed to somebody who maybe can't work because they might have a mental disability or a physical disability. Nothing is wrong with these individuals. It's just the model that I kind of follow, right? I find that if you work in a job, you're going to be better at communication. Your writing skills are going to be a little bit better. Just generally, I have found these individuals easier to work with for me. And so I kind of pay attention to that. And there's two schools of thought there I'll get into in a minute. But then Mike's model is, hey, I want my tenant to pay as little as possible. If it's zero, that's awesome, because that means the government's paying most of this. I'm guaranteed to have max. And he works under that approach, and it works really well for him. And I have no problem with that approach. But for me, I find that if you have a tenant who is working, that's really helpful. The other thing that I have found is that I don't know if there is a politically correct way to put this, but I found that there are individuals in Section 8 who I'll say kind of deserve to be there. They have found themselves in a situation, for example, they had a major car accident and now they've had a brain injury and they have really struggled to focus, but they do what they can to go out into the workforce and they do the best they can to find a job that they can do. But because they've had this substantial life-altering situation, they are unable to achieve what they otherwise perhaps could have, right? And those individuals, I feel like a Section 8 housing choice voucher program is really, for me, is very valuable for that kind of thing from a societal perspective. Like, bad things happen to good people, and it's very good for us as a society to be able to help these individuals out. On the other side of that coin, you have individuals who they're welfare jockeys, right? They like to go in, they just like to, they want to do as little as possible to just survive. So they're going to go out, they're going to get a job if they have to, they're going to get it for as long as they can in order to get unemployment benefits, right? They're going to get the cheapest job that they can. They might otherwise be decent individuals. They might be smart enough to get a good job, or they might be like physically capable enough to get a decent paying job, but they don't because I'm going to say they're lazy, right? And I'm not saying everybody is, but there are individuals like that. And they just they ride that government train. I don't like those kinds of individuals, right? Just from a, hey, purely, conservative perspective, if you want to take the political spectrum of it, that's fine. If you want to say it's some privileged perspective that I have, that's totally fine too. Whatever your take on it is, I don't really like those individuals. Like, hey, you as a human being should be trying to achieve what you can achieve in your life. That's just the way that I feel. The other, and from a landlord perspective, working with these individuals, they're lazy, which means they're not going to respond to you very well. When they do respond to you, it's going to be like the worst English you could possibly imagine. Like, it's like, you have spell check on your phone. How did you even get your phone to write this message? So going forward, my intention is to try to screen for individuals who fit into that first category where they are benefiting from a program that I feel like should be providing them value, not that they're benefiting from a program that is better utilized elsewhere. And you can't just flat out come out and say like, hey, why are you a housing choice voucher holder? Because everybody, oh, it's because I don't make enough money. That's why. But you can ask questions just to get a better understanding of like what their background is. Like, hey, what do you do for work? Honestly, if you want, depending on how thorough you want to get in your interview, say, hey, so what do you do for work right now? Oh, hey, great. How long have you been doing that? Okay, what do you like about it? What do you not like about it? Like, what are you interested in trying to achieve after that? Just make it not a job interview, but just kind of make it like a decent interview to get understanding, work, and understand how this person thinks, how they approach their life outside of just being a landlord. And be like, okay, this is somebody, I can see that they're trying to achieve something, and see they're trying to accomplish something, or I can see that they simply can't because something may have happened, and that's somebody that I want to help out. Work with.
Yeah. And I think this is so important. Well, first of all, I want to make sure everybody understands like, hey, whatever your criteria is, right? You might have a certain strategy where you're like, hey, I want to go after people with the maximum proportion of the rents to be covered by the government, or like Luke is doing right here, a certain percentage, right? Maybe it's 30, 40%. At the end of the day, you have to be consistent with your screening criteria. So you can't just flip flop all of a sudden, right? Because there are fair housing laws in place. So be very mindful of that. But I really agree with you. I believe most people, to the best of their ability, should try to be positive contributing members to society. I think that's just overall how you get a better society in general. So you, as a real estate investor, you get to choose the people that you want to help and how you want to help them. We just choose to help those folks with housing. That's our model. Everybody has all these other nonprofits for dogs, for different shelters, for different types of demographics. That's all up to you. So at the end of the day, I would just urge everyone listening to just be consistent and just understand why you're doing what you're doing. Because look, in my opinion, there's going to be problems, just a different flavor of the problem in whatever path you choose. So that why probably needs to be a little bit more firm in your life, because you're going to have to stick through those problems for you to keep going. Otherwise, you probably just end up quitting. And maybe this is a good segue, Luke, because I want to understand, like, so you bought 6 properties now. Do you feel like you're slowing down, you're speeding up, you're trying to keep the same pace? How are you thinking about your portfolio now after you bought like 6 properties in like 14, 15 months?
I'm going to be slowing down just by circumstance of finances, right? So my properties, I'm not going out and trying to find some like backwater loan to be able to purchase these things, some hard money loan. These are all conventional mortgages. So I've put 20, 25% down on every single one of them. That, as you can imagine, you buy 6 properties, no matter how you slice it, even if you're paying $100K for every single one, which I haven't. I think I've spent $850,000 across those 6.
Wow.
Sounds about right. Well, if I'm putting 20, 25% down, that's a massive chunk of change. So I find myself very cash poor at the moment. So I need to rebuild that cash reserve in order to get back to it. Right. And you said be consistent in your approach, which is absolutely true. The other thing, something that I would mention here is, and if you've ever read, if you are a big reader of books, I've read like Ray Dalio's Principles, for example. Ray Dalio is a master financier. In it, he talks about making notes on every investment decision that you've made so that you can go back and understand why. And so if you are, like, for example, with the property I talked about where I'm making $100 a month, that's way outside my model. I want to be making $300-400 a month per door because of maintenance costs and so on, which is something I really didn't talk about my criteria too much because it's more of a consequence of the other numbers. But I kind of like to see that $300-400 return. I'm going to say, well, you know what? I'm going to make a decision outside of that parameter because of this assumption or expectation. I'm going to make a note of that. And when I revisit this deal next year, the year after that, I'd be like, wait, why is this property dragging down my portfolio? Oh, wait, I made this assumption. That assumption has proven not to be true, or it has proven to be true. And then I can adjust my investment parameters accordingly. All right. So have a set model, have a set approach to things. And if you choose to deviate outside of it, be sure to have a concrete reason why, not it feels like the right idea. No, What are the numbers? What's the specifics? Like, why are you specifically doing this? Note that down and revisit that in a year, revisit in 6 months, 3 months, 2 years, whatever, and say, does that assumption still hold? Is that still a good idea?
Great motto.
Um,
I love that.
so with that in mind, where when I bought my most recent property in Maine, my intention was not to buy another property until the fall. I was like, hey, I spent all my cash on my fifth property. I'm going to take the next 6, 8 months, rebuild a cash reserve, buy another property and go on. So I went into that, with essentially $0 to my name. And then Mike, we're talking and he's like, oh, hey, I just had this deal come by. It's a great opportunity. And I'm like, how am I going to make this work? Like I have no money to my name. I do have a HELOC on my personal property. And this is also risk tolerance. Like, where are you at in the risk spectrum? I was like, you know what? I can take out I think the upfront cash was $66,000, $65,000. I can take that money out of my HELOC on my personal property. I can make that down payment, my closing costs, buy this property with a conventional mortgage and be good to go. But that also means now that I have a $60,000 outstanding balance on my HELOC that I'm very focused and motivated to pay off. My HELOC rate is phenomenal. I have it through a credit union, so it's not specific to the interest thing. It just has to do with risk tolerance and things like that, where it's like, you know what? I don't feel good having my investment strategy being funded by my personal home. I'll do it because this is a really good buying opportunity, but I'm doing it again with that assumption of I'm going to focus all my effort on paying this thing off within 12 months. Right. So,
Yeah. And I love the fiscal responsibility because not a lot of people have that discipline, or they just end up taking on way too much risk than they should. And like, it's really key to not over leverage yourself, but you also have Section 8 rents to kind of help give you that level of comfort, right? So it's always that balance that I always kind of fall back on. So look, I think we talked about like screening tenants differently. I want to start wrapping up with two questions here. Maybe is there like a lesson that you learned maybe the hard way that starting with Section 8 that you wish you could tell your past self now that you reflect back on the last 14, 15 months?
so yeah, I have two lessons here. First one is after my first job, like I had out of college, which I started really late in my career because I went off and worked on a PhD in applied mathematics. So know your numbers is I don't have a PhD. I worked on it for 4 years, but I know your numbers is very much near and dear to my heart. And that's part of the reason why I preach it. But nevertheless, 4 years after my first job, I got a pretty decent payout. It wasn't six figures, but it was a substantial chunk of change. I absolutely could have bought an investment property with the money that I got after that job because it was a startup. We sold it, that kind of payout. I did not do that. And this was back in 2017, 2016, 2017. I did not do that. I did some other stupid decisions with that money. And now I don't have an investment property that I could have bought in 2017. So I get to spend the rest of my life kicking myself for having not bought an investment property in 2017 when I could have. Because right now, if I'd have bought a property, for example, in the condo that I just bought up in Maine back in 2017, I'd be making over $1,000 a month in cash flow on that property. As it stands, I had to pay twice as much for it, and I'm making half as much in cash flow. So I get to spend, the next 50, 60 years being like, man, I should have started 5, 6, 7 years ago when I had the opportunity to start. Instead, I decided, you know what, I want to buy a nice car, or I want to buy a boat, or whatever your, poor money decision of choice is. That's the problem. So that's my number one lesson. Now that I'm into it, it's like, you know what? Yeah, when you buy one property and you're making $300-$400 a month, that's not going to change your life. But I bought 6 and I make $2,500 a month now. $30,000 a year doesn't really change my life, but it definitely makes it feel a whole lot better. Right. So in that respect, I really wish I'd started a lot sooner. And I get to feel that now that I've started, I get to feel that every single day. And I also have to, Mike reminds me frequently. They say, yeah, every time I hang out with him, I just eat a plate of crow, but it is what it is. So that's the lesson that I really wish I would have learned for myself is like start as soon as you are able to and just get into it. The other thing that now that I'm actually into it, say what I would have told myself my like 1 year ago self. It's like, hey, you're about to buy several properties. You are inheriting the poor financial skills of your tenants. Not all of them, but you're going to inherit some of those. If they struggle to pay their bills, you're one of those bills that they're going to struggle to pay. If they struggle to communicate with other individuals, if they have bad I'm not saying bad English, but if they just like, when they're right, like it's just all over the map, the spelling's terrible, you are inheriting those poor communication problems because you are the other side of that equation. So be more deliberate in the tenant that you choose. It can feel like in the moment, and this is something I've certainly learned last month. I had 2 vacant properties from tenant turnover. It can feel in the moment like every single day is costing you money, which, yeah, it is. But spend a little bit extra money on a little bit extra vacancy, find that right tenant, take a couple extra weeks, take a month, whatever, find the right tenant so that you don't inherit all those headaches. Chasing rent is such a pain. Trying to decipher a broken communication from somebody who is English first language is a pain. Like, just pay the cost up front in vacancy to find a good tenant. There are tenants out there. And if you're struggling, something else that I would have, along that same vein, if I'm struggling to find a tenant with a housing choice voucher, go outside, go to private market, and just be more rigorous in your screening process. You go into it and say, like, you know what, I want to find that really good tenant who's really good to work with, who's really communicative, appreciative, who has a good job, whatever the case might be. Find that person, rent your property out to that person. Don't get hung up on having to rent to a housing choice voucher.
Oh, this is such a great lesson, man. I'm so grateful you came on to the podcast today, man. See, look, this is why I was pumped for this podcast, dude. And I mean, hey, I'm so grateful that you came on the podcast. And let me ask you one more question, because this is the question that I try to ask everybody on a podcast. And it stems from the fact I started this podcast 3 years ago, and everybody said, like, hey, we're never going to solve the affordable housing crisis. Blah, 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 whatever. But I'm curious to hear from your thoughts. Like, hey, why do you think affordable housing, particularly the lack of supply of affordable housing, has just been so hard to solve for?
Wow. That is a loaded, multidimensional question for sure. I think that this is going to sound antithetical to how I actually operate, but I think that the way that the government has gone about attempting to solve the problem, say with housing choice vouchers, is actually kind of backward. In the sense, like, hey, we're going to subsidize housing choice vouchers so that people can go out and rent properties in the community. That's great. I like that. I certainly appreciate that, obviously, as a housing choice voucher investor. But what I think they would have benefited from better is investing in builders up front and providing lower cost, interest-free or incentivized building to go and build these affordable houses. You are a builder, and we live in a capitalist society, right? The dollar makes the decision. A builder who can go out and build a property that they can sell for $300,000 or $400,000, that's going to net them profit of $100,000 or $150,000, is going to make that decision over building properties where they might be able to build, say, 3 times as many properties for $100K, but they're only going to be making $25,000 in each one of those units. Would you rather go out and build 3 units and make 75 grand, or 1 unit and make 150K? That's a no-brainer decision. I'd make that decision. You'd make that decision. Everybody's going to make that decision. So I don't fault builders for doing that. Builders are going to build the higher market homes, and that's just the reality. But if you are in the government position, you could go in and say, hey, builder, I'm going to go ahead and provide you interest-free financing, or I'm going to pay for you to build. I know that projects has a really bad, reputation from like the 80s and things like that, because it's like, hey, projects get run down. But the reality is, affordable housing projects, if managed correctly, would be very valuable. Go out and build a community of condos, townhome style condos, put 100 units in there, put 200 units in there. And that is kind of the approach that I would take, as opposed necessarily to doing the HCV way. HCV route has its merits and it has its value. And I do think it's important to do what we can to incorporate these individuals into society and just kind of work on that. But I think that more effort could have been spent, could and can be spent in affordable housing projects and financing that correctly.
Dude, you got my vote if you ever decide to run, man. That's all I gotta say, dude. So, man, that was such a great answer. Very great perspective to have in terms of just understanding, like, hey, there's some benefit to HCV, but the incentives could be driven towards something else that truly incentivizes the right behavior to get more supply out to the market. Man, dude, I'm so energized. There's no better way that I could have started my Saturday morning than having this conversation with you, man. So, dude, I'm just so grateful you came on the podcast again, man. Seriously, without people like you, I would have never had the home I grew up in. I'm so glad you're doing things the right way. You're trying to make sure you buy great properties. You put out a great product to the market. I'm so appreciative of you, man. Hey, Luke, if people want to find out more about you or get in touch with you, where can they find you, man?
So me personally, I think the only place I'm going to be online is going to be LinkedIn, but I spend no time there. I think the best way to get in touch with me, right, as I mentioned, Mike and I work with, we put together section8secrets.com,
Yes.
training course for individuals to go out there. It's $9 a month. You can go on, you can go through the entire course of the month. You can cancel after that month. And I, as the person who benefits financially from you not doing that, is telling you to do that. Go out, sign up for 1 month, go through the course. If nothing else, it will teach you the right questions to ask. It'll help
Yes.
illuminate your misunderstandings, and then you can kind of go as an individual into your favorite ChatGPT and really iron out those questions. If you very much are a cash flush individual and you just want to get into it, but you don't want to have to think about it and you want somebody to hold your hand through it, we do also offer, I think it's $3,000, maybe $3,500 consulting service. Like, we will help you go out and buy your first property. You come in, you're going to get 12 hours of direct one-on-one time with us. So you can have this kind of conversation like Kent and I are having right now. We can talk about
Yes.
the property, we can get into it. So you'll come into that and you'll come out of it with your first property and you'll have all the confidence that we have going through it. If that's the route that you want to take. If you have the money, fantastic. If not, I advocate spend $9, learn what you need to know on
All
Section 8
right,
Secrets.
guys, please check it out. Check out Section 8 Secrets. Follow Luke on LinkedIn. I will make sure we link it down in the show notes below. But man, Luke, I can't wait to have you back on a podcast, especially if you add to your portfolio. Like, dude, you got to text me if you buy anything else because I get super excited when talk about real estate. So I'm always down when someone texts me and say, dude, I just bought this house. Check it out. I'm like, dude, let me check the numbers on it. So I'm pumped, man. I'm so glad you came on a podcast today, dude.
Hey, man, I had a really good time. I really appreciate you running this down, getting us time to sit down together.
Yeah, dude. All right. And we are out.